And I love this about our church. Many of you have been praying for the last month about today and what it was going to be like for you. And so what we've been talking about last month, and if you missed any of it, what we did was we started saying, hey, this is what we're going to do in the year end, and this is what we're going to do when it comes to next year. And we've been challenging for the last few weeks to, hey, what does it look like to support financially your local church? And so we've been doing that. So today what we're going to do, I say this kind of jokingly, I said this, that it's going to be different than most Sundays. Usually I like to take the scriptures and just like open it up, and I like to dissect it. So that's what we do. But today's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. The story that I'm going to tell you about is a guy that I've never met, but that I got to read about. And the guy, and he's got the best name ever, is Dr. Leroy Palmer, right? Dr. Leroy Palmer is a fascinating guy. He was a military veteran. He served in the Air Force, and he gave his life to, yeah, come on, where are my Air Force people at? Yeah. Woot, woot, yeah. I don't mess with them. I watch them fly the Top Gun thing. I know what y'all do. Yeah, I knew that too. Yeah. It's great. That's good. That's fun. Yeah, but so he served in the Air Force, not the Navy, and it was fascinating. He gave his life to Christ at 8 years old. And then he went off and he served in the military. And then around 27 years old, he felt like he was called to be a pastor. And Dr. Leroy Palmer started doing pastoral work. He started doing it in his early 20s, and then he moved on. And he got to serve in some of these like really small churches all over the Southeast. And at the same time that he was doing that, fast forward a few years later, around 1960, a group of people were at a church, and it was a mission church is what they called it. And they were serving, there was about 23 of them, and there was a new development that was happening in the suburbs of a city that was growing. And they looked at this area and they said, there's not a church there, we should put a church there. And so they started praying about what it would look like to go put a church in this little area. And it wasn't fully developed yet, it was just getting started, and they said, we're gonna put a church there. And so what they did, and I love this, we found this footage, I think this is so fun. They found a 2-story house. Let me show you this house. 2-story house, and they put a big sign out front. Back when you could put a big sign out front and not get in trouble. They put a big sign out front. They said, hey, we're gonna meet. And this is in the early 60s. This group of people got together, started meeting in this 2-story house, and they just started meeting together. 23 people is what started this group of people. I don't know if it'll show you here in a second. Their kids ministry, it's so funny. There's like a handful of them. They would run out the back door with 1 or 2 leaders, and they were just playing at a tree. I thought that was like, that's 1960. That's pretty great. You know what I mean? Like, that's all they need. And they were just going. They were just having so much fun. And this group of people started doing that. They started praying for the community that they were in. And then God started to bless it. And the 23 people started to grow to be about 200 people over the course of the first couple of years. And from the 23 that they had, once they found their first location, which was this 2-story house, they hired Dr. Leroy Palmer to come and be their pastor. And I think this is so fascinating. He went to a 2-story house, started preaching to a group of 23-ish people that started to grow to be 30 and 60, 80, all the way up to 200 while they're meeting in this house. And then in around 63, they found 6 acres of property that was sort of set aside for development. They went and negotiated over this 6 acres of property, this 200 people, including kids. And then they raised money in the early 60s to buy the property. And then they went and they broke ground on it. And the first picture, if you can see it, that's a lot of trees. It was just that. It was just all these trees. This group of people came and they had to clear it all out. They had to get plumbing and sewage. Thank God they did that. They did all these sorts of things. They put it all together and they said, hey, over the course of the next year and a half, what we're gonna do is we're gonna put roots down and we're gonna put a church in this part of the city for these people. Now, what's fascinating about this is usually when you talk about churches doing things like this, it's always like the church, and it's always like a whole entity, right? You ever thought about this? Like when you talk about churches that are doing things, it's like, well, what church did it? And Nuvo went and did that thing. And it's like, Nuvo is the name that went and did it, but at the end of the day, it's kind of that way, but the collective is just sort of how you label the whole of individuals who came together and sacrificed to make this thing happen. And these families came and they did that. And then once they got the property, they cleared out enough land. Now this is funny. For everybody who feels set up and tear down, this is for you. They put a tent up and then they hauled pews to am I right? Yeah. Some of y'all like, look, that's where I draw the line. I mean, I'll do the trailer thing, but I don't know about the pews. They hauled pews for these 200 people to go out in the tents and to have service while they started building this building of a church that was there. Now, the church was Edwards Road Mission. That's how it started. And then it became Edwards Road Baptist Church. And Dr. Leroy Palmer would challenge this group of people to build a church there, and then they did. And so 1964, they moved into the building. I think this is so fun. This building right here, if we can show this next building. This is the building. So this is what's fun. I'll just show you. This is back again in the 60s. This entire wing right here, they would call it the Christian Education Wing, right? And this is where they would have Sunday school. Anybody ever been to Sunday school before? Do you know what I'm talking about when I say Sunday school? This is great. This is my major in college, which is a great way to pick up girls. What's your major? Sunday school. You know, like it worked though. What? Anyway, so and then they had this like spaceship looking thing, which is the auditorium. And about 200 people started meeting in this auditorium, and then it continued to grow. And they put roots down. And they would tell stories about how they would come and they would paint this building. Some of you did this when we were at La Scala, and they would paint this thing, and they would do this whole deal. And they said that we're going to build a church here, and this thing is going to house and sort of give legs to and structure not what the church is, because the church is in the building, but this group of people who embodied what the local church was, which is a group of people who are passionately pursuing obedience to Jesus and then giving what they have, and this is the fascinating part, for their neighbors and their friends and their family. And they gave financial resources and they sacrificed, and they worked really hard to do that. Now, what happened later on, 27 years later, there was a lady that was attending this church with her family. They had a kid. The kid's name was Jamie. So this was in 1988-ish. I might be doing my math. Yeah, 1988. Had a kid named Jamie, and Jamie would grow up to be this phenomenal baseball player, like unbelievable. He was the kid that like grew faster than everybody else. And so when coaches pitched back then in South Carolina, there would be like these like fences where the kids could actually hit it out so they could feel like they did, not like they're playing on MLB fields. And Jamie was that kid. And then they were playing on the Texas Rangers, and the coach was Harlan Johnson, and the mom was Rose, who had the son named Jamie, who invited a friend to play on his baseball team, and that friend was me. And they invited me to be on the baseball team, and they invited me to their church. And so I actually started going to youth group. If you guys know what that is, that's where, youth group. And this was the building that we went to. Now, our whole youth ministry was housed in that spaceship-looking thing. And on the other side of it, because the way the land was, it was this massive on-ramp. You've heard me tell this story before. We'd have to walk up like 600 stairs to get there, and all the students would be on the stairs. And so for introverts like me, that's what we like to call hell. So we'd have to walk up amongst all these people and get there. And so Rose Williams, whose son was named Jamie, met me at the bottom of the stairs, and he walked me up. And when I got there, they would do this thing where they'd give you journals as a 7th grader. And it would have like reach, grow, and send, which is what they would do for all these students. And I grew up in church my whole life, but when I went to this church, they gave me this journal. And then about 6 months later, I told you this story a few weeks ago, so you kind of got bits and pieces of this story along the way. I went to a youth camp. It was like Chi Alpha is what we called it, like Christ First, because you had to make it Greek to make it cool. Anyway, and I went and I was praying as a 7th grader, knew that I felt called to start a church when I was real young. And I thought about this week, and I thought about this as we were kind of moving forward through this weekend, is our church doesn't exist because of that group of people. It doesn't, and God could have used another church to do that, because God's going to do what God wants to do. And yet he also used that group of people to make a single mom feel welcome at a church, and a student who was also introverted like I am step out of his shell on behalf of his friend who didn't have a church to come to church, and they would invite him and introduce him to all of their friends, and I would get connected to a small group leader like a guy named Russell Hill, who would look at me as a young kid and go, I think God wants to do something extraordinary through you. When you're in 7th grade, you believe people that are bigger than you. Am I right? And I did. And we started praying about a church plant when I was really, really young. I just knew that I wanted to do this. Now, that's not everybody's story, but the people that were a part of that, youth group, they're all doing really cool stuff. And it's because a group of people, 23 of them, actually to be exact, said, hey, what we're gonna do is we're gonna start a church for people who are outside the faith, which is how part of the Williams family got there. And we're gonna build a place where people can come and experience the power and the presence of Jesus and ask him, what do you want to do with my life? And then Jesus speaks to them and then they go do the thing in obedience that he called them to do. And I think about this sometimes. Is my birthday was this week, and I got all these like birthday messages, which is kind of fun. If you've never done this before, if you get like Facebook messages, everybody's reminded that it's your birthday generally on Facebook, which is so much fun. And I didn't know until this year there's like an automatic button. I looked at Emily, I was like, how cool is it? They all use the same emojis. And she's like, no. I was like, they're so nice. I didn't even know that man used emojis. That was kind of cool. Anyway. But I'll actually go through the end of my birthday, like that night, and I'll respond to these messages from people. And my Sunday school teacher from this church, her name was Kathy Joyce, wished me a happy birthday on Facebook. And it like flooded back all these memories of how she would teach the Bible to us. She'd do these really cool illustrations, sometimes not so cool illustrations. So one time she had snap-off pants, and in the middle of her talk, I don't even remember what she was talking about, but she just ripped the snap-off pants off, and we're like, dear God, like, that she did it, and I remembered that. But she would teach the Bible in a way where I wanted to know what the Bible was about, and I fell in love with the Bible, in part under her teaching. And I thought about it, I was like, it is connected to this group of 23 people who decided to be builders, who decided to say, God, I know that you can do extraordinary things. We're going to upend our lives and we're going to go be a part of something that's not just new, but that's going to move through the city and do something extraordinary. And they did. They did. And that church is still there. That church is still reaching that community and they're still doing really cool stuff. Now, in the midst of my time there, there was a book of the Bible that I never really read because of its name. That's just really honest. I had trouble reading as a kid. What am I talking about? I have trouble reading out loud now. It was Habakkuk. That was the book. And I remember reading it my 8th grade year. And I think probably most every pastor has seen this verse and it meant something to them. So I don't think there's anything for me like uniquely special. But in the same way, there was something that gripped my heart like it does so many people. And in the midst of a deep desire to see God do something, there's this verse in Habakkuk. It says this. It says, Lord, I have heard of your fame. So they're saying, look, I have heard of the depth and the power of your fame. And I stand in awe of your deeds, which is always the fascinating part for me. Like, I've heard that you're great. But on this side, I was like, but I stand in awe of your deeds. It's kind of like this. I was trying to think of like, this is such an oversimplification. But do we have any LeBron fans in the room? Where's Josh? Sorry, let me just, there he is. Everybody say hey to Josh. Josh thinks LeBron's better than Jordan, so we all have sin in our hearts. I'm just kidding. It's kind of like LeBron. Like I love basketball, but I was more like college basketball stuff. And so when we got to Ohio, it was the time that he was playing for the Cavs. And they won the championship. I remember watching that at like a chicken restaurant when they won, which is everybody lost their mind. It was like, yay, LeBron, go Braves. But I had heard about LeBron. But you ever watch LeBron play though? And it's like, I've heard of like how great you are. And then I saw you dunk on Kevin Durant, you know? It's pretty great. You know what I mean? Like I saw you do the thing. I actually saw you move. And I'm like, I stand in awe of that part. And this is what's so fascinating about faith is like some of you, like, you know what it's like to, if there's a God up there, great. And I stand in awe of the fact that like the mountains exist. But that's so beautiful and great and humbling, but like it's different though when God shows up personally for you. And it's like, I've seen your deeds. Like I stand in awe of how personal and interactive you are in my life. And so the writer says, Lord, I've heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds. And it is this, repeat them in our day, in our time, make them known. Which I think is the prayer of every generation of people who take faith seriously and church seriously. Is it like, I've heard of your fame. Like I know how great you are. And I stand in awe of your deeds because I've seen you move. Would you repeat what you've done in the past amongst us? And what's so fascinating about history is that God has done this. You've heard me teach on this before, but like God comes where he's wanted. John Tyson says this over and over. I think it's so powerful. God comes where he's wanted, where people are like, I want you to move. I want you to do something that's beyond our own power, that's beyond our own like strength and might and what I could muster up and how great we could be at what we do. I mean, we should still be great at what we do. I mean, we think we should do that. And also, will you do what only you can do? And so I was preparing for this last night, and this is actually where I was going to stop, and then we were going to move forward to the next thing. But I was Googling the pastor of that church, and he died around 2013 at 99 years old, so that's kind of cool. And I read through his obituary. Now, can I just say this out loud? Rarely do you read through a whole obituary. Most people scan obituaries, but I read it, and it was long. And it was really cool to see the things that he did. But the last line is what got me and kind of messed me up. So the last line of the obituary, you can Google this, you can see this online, it's so funny. This is a screenshot to it. It says, in lieu of flowers, memorial contributions may be made in Dr. Palmer's memory, ready? To the Capital Needs Fund of First Baptist Church in Kingsport. Now, this is so fascinating to me, right? At 99 years old, this man was still planted in a local church. And he's saying, instead of putting flowers down with me, instead of donating other places, I want you to give to the local church so that local church and the capital part of this would have been funding for some version of building expenses so that this other church at 99 years old might continue to put roots down and see the fame and the deeds of God move throughout their city. And I thought to myself, I was like, that's cool. That's really cool. And I thought to myself, at 99 years old, you don't write your own obituary. Which means somewhere in his family, generationally, they decided that that's what we're going to do. In honor of my dad or my grandpa or my great-grandpa, I want you to give beyond yourself to the local church. And generationally, that was passed down. Now, the reason that that's at least so moving to me is this. Being a pastor and being around pastors and pastors' kids, that doesn't happen all the time, you know? And there's a part of this where it goes, this was passed on from generation to the next generation, this desire to see something move. And I was like, that's kind of what we hope for. So if you're here and you attend our church and you're a Christian, can I tell you something? This is like the really honest truth. We built this church so that you could grow, but not so that you could grow selfishly. And here's what I mean by that. That we built this church so that you could grow in proximity of people who are coming to faith, and that both through the knowledge of your mind, but really the work of your hands, you could see the fame and deeds of God move in your midst. Which means that if you come and you only ask the question like, what's in it for me? I'll just tell you this. There are so many great churches that will go entertain you and make this a thing where it can be about you. But that's not what I want for our church. What I hope for our church is that we would always have the core heartbeat of a 23 charter member team. And however big we get, a group of people who are passively engaged in their faith. I want you to put roots down in a city and in a community, both with your financial resources and your gifting, but really your life, to say we're going to build something that's going to go beyond us. And this is what's always a little bit interesting to try to paint a picture of. Now, I'm a futuristic visionary, like every personality profile I take is like, hey, you should stay in the present. It's going to be okay. Like, look around. You're at Chick-fil-A. It's fine. You know what I mean? Like, there's a little bit of that. But what I wish I could paint for you is this, that a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, there will be other people here that will be here because you gave. And our dream for our city is this, that we would have our church here and that we would have other churches across the city where people can come and explore Jesus and come with the doubts and questions that they have. And that these would spring up all over the city and then all over the place. Which means this, and we talked about this last week, that there will be a group of people that come to faith that you never meet, that you give on their behalf and never meet them and never know them. But they will be so glad that you did. And then when it comes to the work that we do missionally, I told a lot of our volunteers this earlier today as we were circled up. I was like, we don't have 12 missions organizations that we partner with. We have one. We're trying to make a difference at the border of Nepal, bringing young girls out of sex trafficking. We help fund that. And I said this last week, every time you buy coffee here, that resource that we spend on coffee goes through a nonprofit to help Our Daughters International is the organization we meet. You're gonna get to hear that story next week. When we get to 12, and maybe one day we'll give to more as we grow, but right now we are going to help solve that problem. Locally, what we do is we say, hey, as benevolence needs pop up, we respond immediately as best we can, right? So we work hard to do that. Some of you have been the recipients of that, and that's because somebody else was generous on your behalf. Nationally, we talk about this. There's not a lot of organizations that we partner with. We're saying we're gonna plant churches that are focused on unchurched people nationally in our country. And the way that we're gonna do this, and this is really fun for us, is the first year we're able to do it like this, is we've been the beneficiary of 19 other, well, actually at this point, 22 other churches that have helped launch our church. People sending teams to help us do stuff, help us build things, help us get started, help us do Easter egg drops. I love this. We brought a group of people from Texas when we did our Easter egg drop this past year, and it like snow rained that day and none of them had jackets. And speaking of hell, that was what they would say was that for them. You know what I mean? Like that was like, they all went to Target and bought jackets that day, which was so funny. I'm like, but we get to do that. We get to be a part of a church plant in another area, and we're gonna send people to go serve them. And we're gonna give resources to them to help them get started. Like that's what we're doing. And so for us, I would say this, if you attend our church and you've been here for long enough to go like, this is my church, like it slipped out that you go to Nuvo, right? Like we don't do like the membership thing as much here. We just kind of say, hey, we're partnering together. We lock arms together. And so if you've locked arms together with us, this is your home church. I would say it this way, and I wish I could like, how do we bake this so deeply in our culture? I want you to be like a charter member versus like a church goer. And even if you're a person who's like, I don't even know what I think about the whole God thing or Jesus thing yet, I'm not even sure where I'm at on the whole faith thing, but I believe in this place. This is always so fascinating. A third of our church is agnostic. A third of our church is agnostic. And that third of our church gives and they serve and they're a part of our church, and it's so beautiful and it's so amazing. I say, like, if that's you and this place is helping you, this is your home church. You might just not be where we're at yet on all the faith stuff, and that's great. But if this is your home church, I want you to be a person who's like a charter member of building something, rather than simply a passive churchgoer. And we've said this before, and this is what we mean by that, is that you're a person who builds the church. You are a church builder here at Nuvo, rather than somebody who passively engages with the whole thing. So I'm gonna ask you to do something real fast. I'm gonna ask you to stand up and tell us your secrets. No, I'm just kidding, we're not gonna do that. That would be really a fun day. I want you to do this for me. This is always fun to do, especially with production stuff. I'd love for you to like look around this room for a second. Like look behind you. This is one of my favorite things. This room seats 683, right? Not that I've counted, I'm just saying. 683 people. This section right here is about 260 seats, roughly, give or take. The side sections are fascinating. I don't know how we would ever seat you on the sides because, well, I don't know how to look that way. But anyway, so there's that, right? The whole room is about 683 seats. Here's what I do deeply believe, that before we leave this building, we'll likely fill this room, at least once. And pastor guys are always fascinated on this because like, you just want a big church. I'm like, I tell you this all the time. I got to work at two of the largest churches in the country. I've done big. I did big at 23. It's not about big. I worked at Mecca in Christianity. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's great. It's awesome. Love it. My budget was bigger than the house that I lived in. It was so great. And I'm just telling you, like, it's not about big for me. Every Sunday I get to speak up here, and this is always fascinating to me. This is my psyche. I see you, and then I see about 400 other chairs that represent people to me. It's not about big, but it's about your friends and your coworkers and your family and the people whose stories are stories like yours, where you come to faith and you trusted Jesus because somebody else built something where you engaged in Jesus in a powerful way. They did that. And so one more time, I'm gonna ask you to do this. I want you to look around the chairs of this room. Some of you have never done this in church. We try to hide it. That's why we put the big thing there, so we don't want you to know how big it is. But now I want you to know how big it is. All these seats are people that will come to our church one day because of your generosity, because of your faithfulness, because you decided not to be a passive spectator when it comes to your local church. And so can I tell you this? And this is what, if you look right here, this is what I mean this so deeply. Here's what I want to tell you, all right? We want to build that church together. I laughed last night. I looked at the final number count of when they got the building. Now, we're not about to buy a building yet. I don't think, knock on wood, maybe. We'll see what happens today. Anyway, so, I'm just kidding. I'll say this. Their number that they referenced on the day before they went to the building, it's just fascinating for me. It was the same number that we had last week at our church. I just laughed. I was like, yeah. And I sat in that sanctuary on the second row as a middle school student, an early high school student. And I engaged my faith so deeply because of the faithfulness of 23 people and then roughly 200 people to start it, which is about where we are. So what I hope gets in your brain and bothers you just a little bit, just honest, ready? Some of you will not see the fullness of what you give to this church because it'll live beyond you. In fact, most of us will not see the fullness of what happens at this church as you give because it'll go beyond you. But you're not giving just to build an organization. You're giving to build a church, and you're giving to make a difference around the world. So, I'll tell you what we're going to do. I've been asking you to do this over the last 3 weeks. I love this. I've gotten so many texts from you. It's always fun. It's like, hey, I did the journal thing that we gave you. Many of you have done that. Many of you talked to me like, I haven't stopped to pray, God, what are you speaking to me? In a long time, you've been doing this. God, what are you speaking to me? And you're like, I got a couple texts. It was like, I felt like he said this. Does this make sense to you? I'm like, yeah, that's great, And then some of you, for the first time, you've been doing this over the last few weeks, and I love this. And what you felt like God was speaking to you actually was a faith step. It actually felt uncomfortable. And you go, it felt uncomfortable. I don't know what to do with that. I was like, oh, that's the deep end. Yeah, that's actually faith. That's what it's like. Yeah, that's the deep end stuff. Yeah, should I do that? What do you think? And so today, what we're going to do is we're going to challenge you in the ways that we've been challenging you for the last 3 weeks to step up and do that. So I wish I had a better practical way to do this. We just don't. On the end of your row, there's a group of cards and pens. I'm going to ask you to grab the card and pens, take one down, pass it around. I'm pretty sure I make that joke every week. I'll ask you to pass it down the row. I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. Now, this is the part, if you are new to our church, it's probably going to feel a little odd, and that's okay. I know that, if this is your first Sunday, jump in the waters with us, great if you want, but this is not necessarily for you. Y'all are good at the passing down thing. It's impressive. I don't know if you guys remember our first Sunday here when I had everybody stand at the same time. Do you remember this? It was like the most sacred moment, and every chair yelled at the same time. Do you remember this? So I don't know why I told you that. I was thinking about it. So we're going to pass those down. Now, here's what we're going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask Meredith to come up. I'm going to ask the band to come up. Oh, what's up, Meredith? How you doing? And honestly, the music side of this, we're going to sing here in a minute. That's how we're going to wrap up our day. But Meredith's going to play for us. And the reason we do that is to help you focus. So there's nothing special about that outside of the idea that we're just going to give you a chance to focus. So I'm going to say a caveat real quick. If you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus, that is great. This is going to feel a little odd. And at the same time, what I hope you get to see for the next few minutes is this. And this is very simply, this is what I hope you get to see for the next few minutes. Is at the bare minimum, you get to see a group of people who believe that God might move beyond them, and they believe in it enough to step up and give in a sacrificial way, which is what we're about to do. So on this card, I think we have the card up there. Yeah. There's two things I've asked you to do over the last 3 weeks to process through and think about. First thing is this. I want you to think about having a giving plan over the course of the next year. Everything that we do, this is just honest, is either funded by our local church or funded by someone else's local church somewhere else in the country. this week, we had a couple more, 23 churches across the country total, right? That's ironic. 23 churches across the country, ironically, have said, hey, we're gonna partner with Nuvo and help us get started. And we're saying, hey, we wanna be fully sustainable locally. And so this is what we're doing. So we're inviting you to be part of that. So I'm gonna ask you, if you call Nuvo home, right, to make a plan to give, right? So these are two things. A generosity plan is the first thing we're asking you to do. And then a year-end giving plan. For us, we say like, hey, we've been giving all year, and then we're going to, and I challenge you this very first week, we're gonna sacrifice at Christmas to give our best offering to do even more. And that money, when we talk about this Love Local thing, as you select it, it's gonna go to missions, spaces, right? So we get ready to give the space that God provides. A portion of it will go through that. And then local benevolence and church planting. Those are the 4 areas that stuff goes to, right? And so what we're gonna ask you to do is to say, hey, we're gonna ask you to give sacrificially here at the year end, right? And I mean actually sacrificially. Like the spiritual part about this is the real part. The organizational part would say, well, we'd love for you to give. And I would love for you to give. I really do. We'd love for you to give because we're gonna do more. I want this to be a spiritual step for you where you give sacrificially and you feel it to some degree, right? That sacrifice in some way. We're doing this as a family. We'd love for you to do that. That's the year and give part. And then, but the make a plan is going, hey, over the course of the next year, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna slice off a portion of my income that I'm gonna give to the local church to build a local church. So here's what this means. I've talked about this early on. I said this the last few weeks. Some of you, the first step in that is to give for the first time consistently, right? Is the first time you've ever done it. Everybody gets caught up on the amounts. I don't want to say I don't care about the amounts, but it's not about the amounts. It's actually about the spiritual step. So I'm gonna give consistently to the local church. I'm gonna figure out a percentage. We talked about tithing 2 weeks ago. I would say for some of you, you've been around church a very long time and you go like, hey, I believe that I should be tithing, but you don't. And for you, a big faith step is like, I'm gonna slice off what a tithe is and give that. And then some of you, you give a percentage of your income. And this is the really honest, and I ask you to evaluate, reevaluate what you give. But you don't give in faith. You give out of passive comfort, but you don't give in faith, right? And so for many of you who are followers of Jesus, I'm gonna ask you to give in faith. And not the kind of faith that says, if I give more money, then God just gives me all the stuff that I want, and here's the thing that I want. Look, I got it because I gave more. That's not really how it works. I'll tell you how it does work though, in the ways that we've seen it, is that as people give in faith, God, and I've seen this so many times, God does trust people who are stewards of what he gives them. These are so many parables to talk about this, so I would say this. It's not about getting more for you. It's about trusting God with your stewardship and saying, you get even this, and whatever you place in my hands, I will be a steward of for your purposes in my life. And you trust him. There it is. Oh, that was good. Dang, that was great. That's so good. Yeah. So, but that's what I want you to do. I want you to go, hey, I want you to do that sort of thing. So here's how we're gonna approach this today. And I don't know of a better way to do this. It's in a high school, so there's not like just all this space that you have. But here's what I'm asking you to do. What we're gonna do for a couple minutes is I'm gonna give you an opportunity to pray about this with you and your family, or on your own for a second. Or if you're here and you're new to our church, just for a second, maybe this is the first time you just get a breath to pause all week, and we'd love for you to just take that breath to pause. But if you call Nuvo home for the next few minutes, I'm gonna ask you to take that card, I'm gonna ask you to take the pen. If you're sitting with your spouse, that's great. If you're sitting with your family, that's great. What we're gonna do is I'm gonna ask you to ask God, what do you want me to do? What do you want us to do when it comes to year and giving, and then making a plan for our giving for next year? And then what we're gonna ask you to do is we're gonna ask you to put it on a card, and I'm gonna ask you, and there's a reason we do it this way. I'm gonna ask you to walk up to the front and fold your card and put it in one of these boxes. Now here's why this matters, because a lot of places are like, just do it on your way out. That's not this. This is not I'm giving passively. This is I am building a local church in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm putting a stake in the ground personally to build a church in Columbus, Ohio. So I want you to walk to the front and put a stake in the ground and do it that way. That's why we're doing it. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ask if you would, however you wanna do this. You wanna bow your heads, great. If you wanna move to a different part of the room, I showed you all these other seats. Maybe some of you are gonna go to another seat and you're like, I'm giving, but I'm giving on behalf of a specific person who's gonna sit here one day, right? Great, you can do that too. However you wanna do it, I want you just for a minute to focus, right? So if you would, I'd ask you just for a second, close your eyes, bow your head. We're gonna pray first, then we're gonna have you respond to this card. If you call Nuvo home, first question that I want you to ask personally, as a couple, as a family, is this. God, what does obedience look like to you in my finances for this coming year, for a year-end gift? I want you to ask that question. Some of you who have been asking this, you already have a plan for it. Fantastic. Great. Some of you thought you had a plan, then you heard about Leroy, and you're like, I don't know. That's great. What is God speaking to you right now? I don't know. Great. God, what does obedience look like when it comes to financial resources? Second question, and I know this is kind of a weird question for a pastor to ask you. Second question internally for you is, what am I actually afraid of? And own that. I'll tell you, when I prayed this prayer over the last 2 weeks, I was actually deeply afraid of, this sounds kind of, how are we gonna afford, and I had a very specific thing that I was anxious about being able to afford, not just for me, but for our family. I was like, I believe that you're gonna come through in this, and I just wanted to own that thing. And what's the thing that you feel afraid of? If you were to be obedient to what God is calling you to do, what's the thing you're afraid of? And then here's the last sort of question in this. In your brain, right, in your heart, right, for those of us especially who are followers of Jesus, who are you building Nouveau for? Who are you building Nouveau for? Some of you, names immediately came to your head. For some of you, it's somebody that you work with. Somebody, it's a boss that desperately needs Jesus. You know what I mean? For some of you, it's a family member. For some of you, it's a friend. For some of you, it's your kids and the friends of your kids. That's great. Who are you building this church for? I want you to think about that for a second. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pray for us. And when I get done praying, we'll have the band come on out. They're gonna sing a song that's kind of been a song that I've sort of said it's kind of a theme for us over the last season. The song's called I Speak Jesus. There's a section of it where it talks about speaking Jesus over circumstances, over people, over things that are happening in your life. And so as they lead us in this, what I want you to do is I actually want you to fill out this card, right? I'd love for everybody to fill out this card. I'd love you to fold it in half. And there's gonna be a really interesting race to see who goes first, right? So stand first, be a leader, start this. And I want you to come down, I want you to put it in the box. I want you to go back to your seat, I want you to remain standing. And we're gonna sing this song as a prayer together. So let me pray for us. You can fill out your card and you can bring it up front and we'll sing together. So Father, we thank you that you're doing something beyond us. Some of us in the room, this feels natural because we do this sometimes. Many of us in the room, this feels very unnatural because we don't do this kind of thing. Some people in the room, there's baggage around church and money and pastors, and I get all that too. Yeah, God, I pray that whatever you need to do in those moments, you would do it. God, for some of us, it's hard to think out in the future. And sometimes, if we're really honest, it's hard for us to think beyond our own circumstances or pain or difficulty or struggle or things that we're walking through, to think that you could even use us on behalf of other people. Father, I pray that you would bake that so deeply into the heartbeat of our church, and not our church as an organization, but as a church of people who are united together in you. And I just ask that you would use this group of people to do something extraordinary here. God, that you would do things that outlive us, that you would do things that go so far beyond us what we could do on our own. And God, as we look out at all these seats like we did earlier today, and most of us can see a person or a group of people or a group of friends, God, I ask that you would help us to just be so desperately on mission for those people, that we would follow you into uncomfortable spaces and uncomfortable conversations and difficulty at times. And truthfully, some of us can never do that because we can't let go of even the financial side. It's hard to even think about having the hard conversation or being engaged with people around us because there's things that we're still holding on to. God, I pray that we would come fully open-handed to you, the fullness of our hearts and our lives and our reputation and our resources and our giftings and our time, every bit of it. And we would say you would take it and that you would multiply it. And every dollar that we give, that you would multiply it out in life change of the people. Over the course of the next year and 5 years and 10 years and 30 years, 80 years. We're talking about Edwards Road today. 50 plus years. God, you would do what only